didn't click this video by accident. You were chosen. Maybe you don't fully realize it yet, but something deep within you has been calling, tugging at your heart, whispers you've ignored for far too long. And now, you're here, on this video, on this very channel, listening, watching, searching. Whether you're a lifelong believer or someone just beginning to question, something divine has drawn you in, because today, something is about to awaken in your soul. This is not just another video on the internet. This is a divine appointment, because what you're about to hear are not just facts, they're truths, eternal ones. Hidden gems buried within the life of the most misunderstood, misrepresented, and yet most powerful figure to ever walk the earth, Jesus Christ. The man who split time in half, the man who knew your name before you were even born. And no, we're not just going to talk about the things you learned in Sunday school. This is for the curious, the hungry, the ones who feel there must be more. Because there is. You see, the world has painted a tame, safe version of Jesus. A smiling figure in a white robe, patting sheep and carrying children. But what if I told you that the real Jesus was far more radical, far more dangerous, and far more human than you've ever imagined? What if I told you he had close friends, family drama, emotions that overwhelmed him, a trade he worked with his bare hands, and moments when he cried, bled, and even sweat drops of blood? What if I told you that the story of Jesus is not just ancient history, it's your story too? That his birth, his death, his resurrection, all of it is mysteriously tied to your own journey. The fact that you're hearing this message now is a sign in itself. Maybe you were scrolling late at night, maybe it auto-played, maybe someone sent this to you. But deep down, you know it's more than coincidence. Something holy is stirring. Because God still speaks. He still reaches out. And sometimes he uses the most unexpected means, like a YouTube video, to get your attention. So I invite you, don't just watch this video. Experience it. Let your heart stay open. Let the noise of the world fade for just a few moments. You were chosen to hear this, and by the end of this story, you'll understand why. The first thing to emphasize is the close relationship between Jesus and John, not only as cousins by blood, but also as a sacred friendship in ministry. John was not an outsider. He was the one closest to Jesus, the only one who stayed with him at the crucifixion, and the one entrusted with the care of Mary, his mother. That bond came not just from blood, but from spiritual harmony, shared vision, and absolute faith. When we look at John, we see the image of a companion during the darkest moments, and also the one granted the grace to record the final revelations, the book of Revelation. Next, a thought-provoking point is that Jesus, despite having the ability to read and write, did not leave behind any written book. This was not because he lacked ability, but because his mission was not to be written in ink. His words came alive through action, miracles, and oral teaching. He left the task of documentation to his disciples, those who would recount his words through lived experience, faith, and actual events. This also serves as a reminder that sometimes what matters is not what we write, but how we live in a way that others remember. Additionally, the fact that some of Jesus' disciples were family members, like James and Jude, shows the blend between spiritual work and personal relationships. Initially, even his own brothers doubted and opposed him, but after the resurrection, they were completely transformed, becoming leaders of the early church. This speaks to the power of truth to change hearts, even those closest to you who once doubted. The name Jesus was not randomly chosen. According to the book of Luke, the angel Gabriel directly commanded Mary to name her son Jesus, which means the Lord saves. That name is both the mission, the nature, and the embodiment of an eternal salvation plan. Just the naming alone is enough to show that every step in his life was predetermined, sacred, and beyond time. Many people think there were 3 wise men who came to worship the baby Jesus, but the Bible does not state the exact number. We only know they brought 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Associating the 3 gifts with 3 individuals is a traditional assumption. What matters here is not the number, but the hearts and recognition of these foreigners, representing the entire Gentile world, that a great king had been born. Equally fascinating is the fact that Jesus had several half-siblings. They are clearly mentioned in the Bible, and this partially refutes the view that Mary remained a virgin forever. This reality makes Jesus more relatable to us, a person who lived in a large family, possibly experienced conflict, misunderstanding, and then forgiveness and growth. When speaking about where Jesus was born, Bethlehem, we cannot overlook the meaning of its name, House of Bread. This becomes even more profound when Jesus refers to himself as the bread of life. He was born in a place symbolizing nourishment, and he himself became the source of life for all nations. Coincidence? Certainly not. This is a perfectly interwoven chain of symbols in God's redemptive plan. A detail unique to the book of Luke is the story of Jesus at age 12, staying behind at the temple, causing worry for his parents. While others were searching for him, like a lost child, he was in deep conversation with the teachers, questioning and engaging as an adult. This was the first time he publicly expressed his awareness of belonging to his Father's house. From that moment, his mission had begun, though it would be 18 more years before it officially launched. Jesus is also known as a carpenter, a humble, ordinary job that required diligence. He was not born in a palace, nor did he study in elite rabbinic schools. That hands-on labor shaped him into someone relatable to the people, someone who understood hardship and toil, which also made it hard for others to believe he could be the Messiah. Jesus' appearance was nothing special. The Bible describes him as having no beauty that we should desire him. This completely contrasts with traditional artistic portrayals, where Jesus always appears handsome with flowing curls. However, the lack of physical attractiveness made people focus on his words and deeds, not his looks. Jesus' first miracle was turning water into wine at the wedding in Cana, a profoundly symbolic act. It marked the beginning of transformation, not just water into wine, but old life into new life. Jesus began his ministry with joy and ended with the cross, but both expressed unconditional love. Another interesting point is that the final book of the Bible, Revelation, ends with a blessing from Jesus himself. He is not only the center of the first book, Genesis, with the promise of a seed to crush the serpent's head, but also the main figure of the conclusion, where he returns in glory. Jesus began his public ministry at about age 30, the exact age required for priests in the Old Testament. This was not mere coincidence, but a perfect fulfillment of the law. He didn't abolish tradition, he fulfilled it through his own life. The little-noticed detail is Jesus' linguistic ability. He spoke Aramaic, his native language, read the scriptures in Hebrew, and was able to communicate in Greek, the common language of the ruling class. This shows perfect preparation for him to engage all social strata, from the poor to the powerful. Jesus frequently withdrew from the crowds to pray alone. This was not just a spiritual act, but a psychological necessity. After long days of healing, teaching, and debate, he needed time alone with God for renewal. Even the Savior needed silence, so how much more do we? An interesting question is, are there people today who carry Jesus' bloodline? The answer is no, because Jesus had no physical children. However, his half-siblings may have had families. If so, indirect descendants of Jesus' family could still exist, an emotional thought, but one that doesn't change the mission of his salvation. Jesus did not hide his emotions. He wept when a friend died, became angry when the temple was turned into a marketplace, and had compassion when he saw the crowds like sheep without a shepherd. A Savior who cries, who gets angry, who loves, that is completeness, a true image of a God who draws near. Jesus' 40-day fast in the wilderness also mirrors the journeys of Moses and Elijah. The number 40 becomes a symbol of testing and preparation. In hunger, he not only overcame temptation, but gave us a survival lesson. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. When he was crucified, his face was beaten beyond recognition. This is not just a gory detail, it is proof of the cost of sin. No one loves us more than someone willing to bear every ounce of physical and emotional pain to redeem us. Jesus drank wine and was even mocked as a drunkard, a friend of sinners. But this shows that he did not live by hypocritical standards. He showed up where people needed him most, and the wine at Cana was just the beginning of a new covenant, sealed with his own blood. Continuing with the miracle of raising the dead, we must pause to feel the weight of what that means. When Jesus raised 3 people, the son of the widow in Nain, the daughter of Jairus, and especially Lazarus, He did not merely demonstrate power over death, but also showed the deepest compassion for those in pain. In every case, he acted not just to prove his divinity, but because of genuine sorrow in his heart. With Lazarus, his close friend, Jesus wept. The tears of God were not because he was powerless, but because he sympathized. This completely shatters the image of a cold, distant deity who only issues commands and punishment. Jesus is the one who knows human emotion, and more than that, he chose to live among us to experience that pain. Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, meaning the body had already begun to decompose. But when he called out, "Lazarus, come forth," death was no longer the end. In that moment, resurrection was no longer a theological concept, but a living reality in front of many witnesses. Jesus' earthly ministry lasted only about 3.5 years. Compared to any great historical figure, 3.5 years seems too short to spark a world-changing movement. But it was precisely that brevity that made his impact even more extraordinary. In an age with no social media, no press, no printing press, a man from a rural village, uneducated in the elite rabbinic schools, caught the attention of the entire Roman Empire. And even today, more than 2,000 years later, his name remains the center of human history. 3 times God the Father spoke directly to his Son, 3 moments that marked turning points. The first was at Jesus' baptism, where God publicly confirmed him as the beloved Son, marking the beginning of his public ministry. The second was on the Mount of Transfiguration, where God emphasized that all must listen to my Son, a transfer from law and prophets to grace through his Son. The final time, just before the cross, God affirmed that glory would not come through violent conquest, but through sacrifice. These 3 moments were not just affirmations of identity, but divine encouragement and support in Jesus' loneliest hours. Among the dozens of miracles Jesus performed, only the feeding of the 5,000 is recorded in all 4 Gospels. This is not because it was the most spectacular, but because it carried such deep meaning. It was a powerful image of both spiritual and physical provision. Jesus didn't just care for souls, he cared about the physical hunger of the crowd that followed him. In the simplicity of 5 loaves and 2 fish was the wholehearted offering of a little boy. And in the hands of Jesus, the small became miraculous. That is also a message to us. What you think is little, if offered to God, can be used to feed a generation. As the hour of his arrest and crucifixion approached, Jesus entered the Garden of Gethsemane. There, he experienced a spiritual struggle so intense that his sweat became like drops of blood. The medical term is hematidrosis, which happens when a person is under extreme stress, causing small blood vessels under the skin to rupture and mix with sweat. This was not just a physical image of suffering, but proof that Jesus fully understands the emotional pain we endure: pressure, anxiety, fear. He knows it all, and that is why he can truly sympathize. One special detail is that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was present at both of the most important moments: his birth and his death. If his birth brought great joy to humanity, his death brought heartbreak to his mother. This reminds us of Simeon's prophecy. A sword will pierce your own soul too. There is no greater pain than watching your child suffer injustice and die a brutal death. Yet Mary stood there, quiet, steadfast, a symbol of faith and devotion. On the cross, a sign was placed that read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews," written in 3 languages, Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. This was not just to mock him, but ironically became a proclamation of truth to the world of that time. While people thought they were ridiculing, they were actually declaring, "He is King, not just of the Jews, but of all nations." It is worth noting that crucifixion was not a rare punishment. The Roman Empire used it as a tool of intimidation and execution for rebels. But the death of Jesus was completely different, not because it was more painful, but because of who he was. The innocent one dying in place of the guilty. He didn't just die, he bore the wrath of God, carried the sins of humanity, and in doing so transformed the cross from a symbol of shame into a symbol of redemption. After his death, Jesus was buried in the tomb of a wealthy man, Joseph of Arimathea. Just as prophesied in Isaiah, he was with the rich in his death. That stone tomb was sealed with 3 layers of protection: a heavy stone, Roman guards, and an imperial seal, measures that made body theft impossible. Yet, on Sunday morning, the tomb was empty. No one opened it and no one could ever seal it again. Resurrection had come. The resurrection was not just spiritual. Jesus' body rose, could be touched, and could eat food. He himself said, "Touch my hands and feet. A spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." This is central to the Christian faith, that Jesus truly rose again, not as a ghost or an illusion, but physically alive. After his resurrection, Jesus appeared at least 12 times to individuals and groups. He appeared to Mary Magdalene, the woman society had scorned, as a way of affirming the value of women. He appeared to disciples who were discouraged, to Thomas full of doubt, and even to 500 people at once. All these appearances were not performances, but moments of healing, restoration, and commissioning. At last, Jesus gave the Great Commission, a mission for all who believe. Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey all that I have commanded you, and baptizing them. This is not a gentle suggestion, but a command to every Christian. If we believe in the gospel, then sharing it is not optional. It is our responsibility. We must also remember that John the Baptist, the one who prepared the way for Jesus, was his cousin. That relationship was no coincidence. John's appearance was preparation, a voice crying out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way for the Lord." This story reminds us that sometimes God uses those closest to us to help us prepare for a greater calling. The number 40 appears many times in Jesus' life. 40 days of fasting, about 40 months of preaching, and 40 days between the resurrection and ascension. In the Bible, this number always symbolizes testing, transition, and preparation for something new. It was no coincidence, but an intentional design in the entire plan of redemption. The prophet Micah foretold hundreds of years earlier that the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And miraculously, a Roman census forced Joseph and Mary to travel from Nazareth to exactly the place the prophet had declared, fulfilling the promise. Finally, the prophet Isaiah clearly said, "A virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel," which means God with us. Nothing could be clearer. And the New Testament confirms that this prophecy was fully fulfilled in Jesus. When we look back on the entire journey of Jesus on earth, there's one undeniable truth. His life was woven together by miraculous threads connecting prophecy, concrete action, and fulfillment down to the smallest detail. For example, Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, a small village with almost no political or economic status, was the exact location prophesied centuries earlier by Micah. Why would God choose such a humble place? Perhaps because he intended to overturn the entire value system of mankind. That greatness doesn't come from position, but from purpose. Likewise, the prophecy in Isaiah about the virgin birth, something that seemed irrational and impossible, became the foundation for the birth of a new universe of faith. In a world where everything must be explained by reason, a virgin becoming pregnant stands as a declaration that God is not confined by human logic. When he chooses to act, nothing is impossible. Similarly, the fact that Jesus was not born in a palace or into a noble family reveals God's unexpected choice. By human standards, the Messiah should have been a warrior, a political leader, or at least a distinguished scholar. But he was born in a manger, raised in the home of a carpenter, lived among the common people, and chose as companions fishermen, tax collectors, and even those rejected by society. This is what makes the Christian faith uniquely powerful. God didn't come to rule us from afar, but to walk with us in every pain, every humble circumstance. One detail that demands our reflection is Jesus' emotional journey. Today, many tend to imagine him as a detached figure, without anger, sorrow, or emotion. But the Bible paints a very different picture. He became angry when God's house was turned into a marketplace. His heart broke when Lazarus died. He had compassion when he saw the crowd wandering like sheep without a shepherd, and he cried out in agony on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" These emotions don't diminish his divinity. In fact, they magnify his loving humanity, the humanity he embraced in order to save us. Equally important is Jesus' interaction with women. In a Jewish society deeply patriarchal, women were often marginalized or invisible in religious life, yet Jesus shattered that norm. The first person to receive news of his resurrection was not Peter, John, or any male leader, but Mary Magdalene, a woman once labeled a sinner. He not only healed her body, but restored her dignity. This is no minor detail. It was a revolution in human worth, a proclamation that everyone is valuable in the eyes of God, regardless of gender, social status, or past mistakes. From that, we understand that Jesus' mission wasn't just to save souls, but to restore human dignity. He didn't just forgive sins, he lifted people from shame. He didn't just heal the body, he healed the heart. Think of the woman caught in adultery. When everyone held stones, ready to execute her, Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground, then asked, "Let anyone among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone." He didn't condone sin, but he didn't condemn like the world either. He brought truth with compassion. One of the qualities that made Jesus' ministry so powerful was his teaching style. He didn't preach like the law teachers, full of theory and citations, but used parables, familiar images, and approachable words. Stories like the prodigal son, the good Samaritan, or the sower weren't just easy to understand, they were unforgettable. He didn't aim to impress with knowledge, he used simplicity to transform hearts. And within that simplicity, Jesus revealed his nature. A king, but with a crown of thorns, not gold. A teacher, yet he washed his disciples' feet. A Lord, yet he wept with the grieving. The one who had power to heal the sick, cast out demons, command the wind and sea, but allowed himself to be mocked, beaten, and crucified by the very ones he came to save. The life of Jesus cannot be separated from the cross. It was the inevitable destination, the climax of his redemptive mission. But the cross wasn't the end. Early on the third day, the empty tomb declared that death no longer had the final word. The resurrection wasn't just a triumph over physical death. It was a proclamation. Sin no longer binds humanity. Death is no longer the final destiny. Hope has returned. After the resurrection, what Jesus did was even more profound. He didn't appear as a distant miracle. He ate with them, talked with them, let them touch him. And then, when it was time to leave the earth, he didn't abandon his disciples. He promised the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, the Teacher, to help them fulfill the rest of the mission, to bring the gospel to all nations. That leads us to the Great Commission, a call not just for a select few but for all who bear his name. It's a call to courage, to faith, and to hope. In a world full of darkness, Jesus handed the torch of light to his disciples and to us today. No one is exempt from this calling. If you believe, you are sent too. And if we are sent, then the details of Jesus' life become our equipment. Every miracle is a testimony. Every teaching is a compass. Every drop of blood on the cross is evidence of unconditional love. Every moment he spent alone in Gethsemane is a reminder that sometimes, to complete a mission, we must walk through solitude. But even in solitude, we are not abandoned. Jesus didn't just leave us words, he left us himself. A real person with flesh and blood, with emotion, with tears and sweat. And that truth, that God became human, lived with us, and died for us, is what makes the gospel eternally different. Now that you've heard these truths, what will you do with them? You see, Jesus never intended to simply be admired. He came to be followed. His story wasn't meant to stay within the pages of a book. It was meant to be lived, echoed, and continued through you. Through your words, through your actions, through your faith. You've just encountered a side of Jesus that many people never talk about. The raw, real, human Jesus. The Jesus who walked dusty roads, who felt pain, who embraced outcasts, who challenged empires, who wept for his friends, and who faced death with courage, not just for himself, but for you. And now, that same Jesus is knocking at the door of your heart. Can you feel it? That stirring? That pull? That undeniable feeling that something's shifting inside you? That's not just emotion. That's the Holy Spirit. That's the same presence that raised Jesus from the dead, whispering to you now, inviting you into something eternal. And the truth is, you have a choice. To walk away and forget, or to embrace the greatest story ever told and find your place in it. Because you're not just a viewer. You're not just a spectator. You are part of the reason Jesus came. And if you've ever wondered why your life feels like it's missing something, this is it. This is him. And he's waiting. Not with judgment, but with open arms. All you have to do is respond. So don't let this just be another video you watched and scrolled past. Let it be a turning point. Let it be the moment your story collided with his. And if you feel it in your heart, if something inside of you is saying, this is truth, this is what I've been searching for, then talk to him right now. You don't need perfect words. You just need honesty. Say, Jesus, I want to know you. I want to follow you. I want the life you promised. That's all it takes. One honest moment. And everything changes because he's not far. He never was. And now, you know it. Thank you for watching, but more importantly, thank you for listening. And remember, you weren't here by accident. You were chosen, you were loved, and your story is just beginning.